London, April 1942. Britain's intelligence agency, MI5, received an intercepted message that made their blood run cold. The Nazis were celebrating. One of their spies had just reported critical military intelligence, a convoy of 18 warships leaving Liverpool, heading to Malta. The problem? MI5 had no idea who this spy was, but they knew one thing for certain. There was a traitor among them. The hunt was on. MI5 agents tore through their records. They interrogated suspects. They monitored ports, train stations, telegraph offices. Nothing. Whoever this spy was, they were a ghost. But then, the intercepted messages kept coming. And they weren't just coming from one person. According to Nazi intelligence reports, there was an entire network operating in Britain. A Swiss-German businessman in Liverpool, watching the docks. A Venezuelan student in Glasgow, tracking troop movements. A Portuguese man in Wales, monitoring airfields. And someone in London, orchestrating everything. The Germans called him their best agent. They were paying him a fortune, over $11,000 a month in today's money. By the end of 1943, that number would balloon to over $100,000 monthly. MI5 was dealing with the most sophisticated spy ring they'd ever encountered, or so they thought. Weeks went by. The messages continued. Detailed reports about military exercises on Lake Windermere, warships leaving the southwest coast, troop movements across Scotland. But MI5 couldn't find a single member of this network. It was as if these people didn't exist. Then, one of the analysts noticed something strange. In one intercepted report, the spy mentioned that people in Glasgow would do anything for a liter of wine. The analyst paused. A liter? Britain didn't use the metric system, and Scots certainly weren't known for their wine consumption. They preferred whiskey, and they measured it in pints. Another report mentioned casual strolls through the center of London and visiting cafes. The details felt oddly generic, like someone describing a place they'd read about but never actually been. Then came the report about military exercises on Lake Windermere. While there was military activity in the area, the specific details didn't quite match reality. Then it hit them. What if this spy network wasn't real? What if someone was making the whole thing up? MI5 dug deeper into the reports. The more they analyzed, the more the pieces fell into place. The intelligence was always just accurate enough to seem legitimate, but never quite specific enough to be truly useful. When it was specific, it was either slightly wrong or arrived too late to matter. The spy network's movements and observations lined up perfectly with what someone could learn from a tourist guidebook and a map of Britain purchased from any bookstore. And that convoy to Malta? Pure coincidence. Ships had left Liverpool around that time, but this spy couldn't have possibly known their actual destination. He'd just gotten lucky. Someone was feeding the Nazis elaborate fiction, and the Nazis were treating it as gold. But who would do this, and why? MI5 traced the communication patterns back through Europe. The trail led them to Lisbon, Portugal, not London. And that's when they found him. His name was Juan Pujol García. Not a trained spy, not a military officer, not even British. He was a Spanish chicken farmer from Barcelona who hated fascism. During Spain's brutal civil war, his farm had been seized, his mother and sister kidnapped, and he'd been forced to fight for a cause he didn't believe in. He despised the extremism on both sides. When World War II erupted, Pujol made a decision. He would do whatever it took to stop the Nazis. He walked into the British embassy in Madrid and offered to spy on Germany. The British turned him down. They didn't trust him. So Pujol came up with a different plan. He went to the German embassy instead, pretending to be a passionate Nazi supporter who worked for the Spanish government. At the time, Germany desperately needed intelligence from Britain. Their spy network there was virtually non-existent. They hired him immediately. The Germans gave him $3,000 in cash, a codebook, a bottle of invisible ink, and instructions to move to London and start gathering intelligence. Instead, he moved to Lisbon and simply pretended to be in London. From a small apartment in Portugal, armed with nothing but a map of Britain, a tourist guidebook from the local library, and an incredible imagination, he started writing letters. He described the places he was visiting, the military exercises he was observing, the warships he was watching leave port. To make it convincing, he filled his reports with mundane personal details. Going for walks, visiting cafes, even mentioning when he felt ill. Then he took it further. He invented an entire network of sub-agents. The Swiss-German businessman in Liverpool, the Venezuelan student in Glasgow, the Portuguese man in Wales, even a pilot who supposedly carried his letters from London. Each agent had detailed backstories, family members, personal problems. Pujol talked about them at length. Of course, none of these people existed. But if the Germans ever questioned any intelligence, his fictional sub-agents could take the blame for bad information. The Germans started to believe him. They were so impressed that they began sending $500 monthly to fund his growing network of imaginary spies. MI5 couldn't believe it. This amateur had accidentally created one of the most effective counterintelligence operations in history. So they made him an offer. What if he did it for real? In April 1942, Pujol moved to London for the first time. MI5 gave him the codename Garbo, after the famous actress, because he was the greatest performer they'd ever seen. Now, with access to actual military intelligence and Britain's full support, he wasn't just confusing the enemy anymore. He was about to orchestrate the greatest deception in military history. The Allies were planning the largest seaborne invasion ever attempted. Over 2 million soldiers from 12 nations, more than 100,000 vehicles, all landing on the beaches of Normandy, France. The challenge? Pulling this off without the Germans suspecting a thing. Garbo got to work. First, he convinced the Germans to let him communicate via encrypted Morse code instead of letters. This meant he could send information faster and more frequently. Then he started planting seeds. One of his agents reported that London underground tunnels were being extended toward the southeast, with ammunition being moved through them. Another saw assault barges gathering at Dover. A third spotted convoys of Canadian troops arriving in Southampton. Garbo himself began reporting an entire army of American soldiers gathering in southeast England. All of this activity pointed toward one target, Calais, the closest point between England and France. To support Garbo's lies, British intelligence went all in. They cut fake airstrips into fields across southeast England and placed hollow wooden planes beside them. German reconnaissance planes photographed them and started bombing these fake sites. A massive fake oil storage facility was constructed in Dover. Photos of King George visiting the site were published in local newspapers. Movie-set quality props transformed modest boats into what looked like enormous battleships from the air. Inflatable tanks were positioned everywhere. They'd built an entire phantom army. The goal was to convince Hitler that Normandy would be a diversion, a trap, and that the real invasion, the massive one, would come later at Calais. It worked. British intelligence intercepted a conversation between Hitler and a Japanese ambassador. Hitler stated clearly that he believed the first attack would be a decoy, and that the Allies were really preparing for a second, larger attack elsewhere. Garbo's messages were landing directly on Hitler's desk, and Hitler believed every word. The Nazis made their decision. They moved hundreds of thousands of troops to defend Calais. Troops that wouldn't be at Normandy. June 5, 1944. One day before D-Day. German radio operators usually signed off at 11:30 p.m. But that night, Garbo insisted they stay alert. Big news was expected at 3:00 a.m. At exactly 3:00 a.m., Garbo sent an urgent message. One of his agents reported that vomit bags and rations were being distributed to soldiers. An attack was imminent. Hours passed. No response from the Germans. They'd gone to sleep. At 6:30 a.m. on June 6th, Allied forces arrived at Normandy, completely undercover, outnumbering the Germans 3-1. It was brutal. But the Allies secured their foothold in France. And here's the remarkable part. Even after the Normandy landings began, the Nazis refused to move troops from Calais. They kept waiting for the real invasion that Garbo had promised, the invasion that would never come. Over 6 weeks, the Allies poured troops, vehicles, and supplies through Normandy. The liberation of Europe had begun. The Allies won the war. Hitler was so impressed with Garbo's intelligence that he awarded him the Iron Cross, Germany's highest military honor. At the same time, Britain awarded him the Order of the British Empire. He became the only person in history to receive war medals from both sides of the same war. After the war, fearing Nazi retaliation, Pujol faked his own death and disappeared to Venezuela. For 40 years, the world thought he was gone. Until 1984, when a British writer named Nigel West became obsessed with finding him. West obtained a Barcelona phone directory and started calling every Juan Garcia listed. There were many. Eventually, one of Garbo's nephews answered. After some convincing, he helped arrange contact. 40 years after vanishing, Juan Pujol García agreed to return to Europe. He visited the beaches of Normandy and finally saw, with his own eyes, the place where thousands of lives had been saved. All because one chicken farmer decided that if no one else would fight the Nazis, he'd do it himself. With nothing but a map, some invisible ink, and an imagination that fooled Hitler. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's a really good story.